My wedding was on a Saturday. My sister had a quarterly review at her firm on the same day. My parents chose the quarterly review. I want to be precise about this because the details matter and I have replayed them often enough to know them exactly. My wedding was scheduled for the third Saturday of June. Marcus and I had set the date 14 months in advance and sent save the dates the same week we booked the venue. The date was not a surprise to anyone. My mother had circled it in the paper calendar she keeps in the kitchen since 1994, the kind with a different bird on each month. June had a wren. My sister Emily's quarterly review, a routine internal presentation at the corporate law firm where she worked, reviewing her caseload metrics for the prior 3 months, was originally scheduled for a different week. I found this out later from my cousin who works in the same professional network, not from Emily herself. The review had been moved due to a conference room scheduling conflict to the Saturday of my wedding. Emily was given the option to reschedule it to the following Tuesday. She did not take the option. She told my parents the presentation was unavoidable. My parents chose to go to the presentation. They told me by voicemail on a Thursday, 4 days before the wedding. My mother left the message. She said they were sorry, that they loved me, that Emily really needed their support for this one, and that I would understand because I was always the one who understood. She said we would celebrate together soon, and she was so proud of me. I did not call her back that week. I want to explain who Emily is before I explain anything else, because the wedding is not really the story. The wedding is just the moment the story became visible. Emily and I are 4 years apart. She is younger. From the time she was old enough to have needs that required management, she had a particular talent for presenting those needs as crises, and crises as emergencies, in a way that made everyone around her feel both responsible and inadequate. This is not a skill most people develop consciously. In Emily, it seemed to come naturally, the way some people are naturally musical or naturally good with directions. She was naturally good at making her circumstances feel urgent, and other people's feel optional. My parents, who are fundamentally decent people with limited reserves for complexity, defaulted to supporting whoever was most loudly struggling. Emily was always more loudly struggling. I was, by contrast, always the one who was fine. I had learned to be fine because fine was easier than the alternative, and fine was what the family needed me to be so it could direct its attention elsewhere. This is not a grievance. I am describing a dynamic, not assigning blame, but it is important context for everything that follows. The wedding was beautiful. Marcus and I had 60 guests. Close friends, his family, my aunt who walked me down the aisle because she was the one who had always shown up. We rented a farm property 40 minutes east of the city, a converted barn with string lights and long wooden tables, and a field that went gold in the late afternoon. People cried at the vows in the good way, the involuntary way, the way that happens when something feels genuinely true. We danced until 10 p.m. My aunt's husband played guitar for an hour after the formal music stopped. There are photographs I look at every year on our anniversary and still feel the specific quality of that evening, warm and earned and complete. My parents were not in any of them. I called my mother the Monday after the honeymoon, 2 weeks after the wedding. I told her, in the measured tone I had been practicing internally for 14 days, that I was not going to argue about the decision, that I wasn't interested in the explanation for why Emily's quarterly review had outweighed my wedding day, and that I needed her to understand that something had changed between us. I said this plainly, without raising my voice, without crying. My mother said Emily had really been under a tremendous amount of pressure. I said I knew. She said, "You know how it is with her. She needed us. You're always fine." I said, "I know, Mom. I have always known." That was the end of that conversation. Marcus and I built a life. He works in architecture's sustainable residential design, the kind of work that is technically demanding and genuinely creative and that he is very good at. I run an HR consulting practice, 20 clients, 2 part-time employees, profitable since the 3rd year. We bought a house with a yard and a porch and a guest room with its own bathroom. We had 2 children. We see my parents 4 or 5 times a year, holidays, birthdays, a summer visit. The relationship is cordial, occasionally warm, consistently surface level. We talk about the kids, about the house, about practical things. We do not discuss the wedding. We do not discuss the decade of pattern that preceded it. We have, by mutual unspoken agreement, put that conversation in a room and closed the door. Emily's life, meanwhile, continued to develop. She made partner at 31, which was fast and impressive, and which she discussed at every family gathering for the following 2 years. At 34, her firm restructured in the wave of consolidations that moved through corporate law that year, and Emily's position was eliminated. She moved to a smaller firm, then to a solo practice arrangement, then to a period of what she described as transitioning that lasted most of a year. The income she had structured her life around, the downtown apartment, the car, the specific category of clothing that corporate law requires, was no longer there, and she had not saved at the rate that would have allowed her to wait it out comfortably. My parents helped. Of course they helped. They remortgaged the house the first time, $60,000 during Emily's first financial crisis at 35, to cover debts and buy time while she rebuilt. They remortgaged again at 37, smaller amount, different crisis. Each remortgage had been presented to me after the fact, as a completed decision, the way decisions affecting the whole family had always been presented to me. After. By the time Emily was 39, my parents were in their late 60s, managing a hardware store that had been modestly profitable for 3 decades and was not growing, carrying 2 mortgages on a house that had been their retirement asset, their cushion, the thing they had planned around. The cushion was gone. The planning looked different than it had. My cousin, my mother's niece, who is frank in the way that good cousins are, called me occasionally and kept me informed of things my parents did not tell me directly. I appreciated this. I was watching from a distance, but I was watching. On a Tuesday in October, 5 years and 4 months after my wedding, my mother called. She said she and my father had been talking. Emily was not in a position to help right now. Her situation was still unsettled. They had been thinking about their options. They wondered if Marcus and I had space, just for a while they figured things out. I sat with that for a full minute before I said anything. The guest room was available. It was comfortable, private, had its own bathroom. Logistically, it was possible. And my first instinct, the old instinct, the one I have carried since childhood, was the immediate yes. Of course. Whatever you need, I'll handle it. That instinct has been with me so long that it responds before I've had time to think, the way a trained reflex responds before the mind has consciously registered the situation. I have been working on the gap between the reflex and the response for years. This was the first time the gap held. I asked my mother to give me a few days to talk to Marcus. Marcus and I talked. He said with the directness that is one of the things I love most about him. This is completely your call. I will support whatever you decide. But I want you to tell me what you actually want, not what you think you should do. What I actually wanted required some time to locate. I thought about the guest room, indefinitely occupied, with the understanding that Emily's instability was the reason and Emily's eventual recovery was the horizon. I thought about what it would mean for my children, the model it would set, the atmosphere it would create, the sense that the house had a permanent weight in one corner. I thought about the pattern. The way my parents had remortgaged their future to fund Emily's crises, had turned to me after each depletion because I was the stable account, had spent 30 years in this arrangement without once asking whether the arrangement was fair or whether I had anything that might need protecting too. I thought about the wedding, not with anger. I have been past anger for years, with clarity, with the particular vision that comes when you look at something long enough to see its real shape. I called my mother back on Friday morning. I told her we had thought about it carefully and we weren't going to be able to take them in. I told her I had spent several evenings researching assisted living and independent living communities in their area, and I had found 3 that I thought would suit them well, good facilities, genuinely pleasant environments, priced appropriately, not far from people and places they knew. I had written up a brief comparison of all 3 and would email it to them that afternoon. My mother was quiet for a moment that felt long. Then she said, "We thought you'd help." I said, "I know, and I love you both. The email will be there this afternoon." My father called later that day. He was not unkind, but he was genuinely confused, the confusion of someone who has held a model of how things work and is encountering a fact that doesn't fit it. He said he didn't understand what had changed. I told him, gently but directly, that something had changed 6 years ago and that I had been living with it quietly since then. I said I wanted to be helpful to them. I said I needed to be helpful in ways I could sustain without cost to my own family, and that taking them in indefinitely was not one of those ways. He was quiet for a while, then he said, "We made a mistake not coming to the wedding." I said I believed that he believed that. He said he did. He said he thought about it more than I might expect. I told him I believed that too. He moved into one of the communities I had researched, the second one on the list, which had the best outdoor spaces and a chess club that interested my father and a gardening program that suited my mother. It turned out to be a genuinely good fit. My father joined the chess group within the first month. My mother's gardening project has expanded to 2 raised beds. I visit once a month. We have better conversations at those visits than we ever had at Christmas dinner or over family phones, partly because everyone is on neutral ground, and partly because there is nothing left to manage or protect. Emily and I do not speak. I hold no particular anger toward her as a person, but I am not willing to maintain a relationship built on the expectation that I absorb whatever overflow she creates, and that expectation has been the foundation of our relationship since childhood. At some point, you stop trying to renegotiate a foundation and simply build on different ground. My children have 2 grandparents who are delighted to see them on Sunday visits. My parents have a safe and pleasant place to live. My guest room is at last a guest room. I did not make any of these decisions as revenge. Revenge requires an ongoing investment in grievance that I find unaffordable and uninteresting. I made them because when I finally asked myself what I would do if Emily hadn't existed, if the wedding had simply been a wedding, and my parents had simply missed it, and there was no larger pattern to explain it, the answer was still the same. I would still have said no to an indefinite arrangement, because I have a full life that matters and finite capacity, and a family of my own who deserve the version of me that is not depleted. The wedding was not the cause of any of this. It was the moment I finally allowed myself to see the cause clearly, and to understand that seeing clearly is not the same as being unloving. You can see someone clearly and love them simultaneously. The clarity is, in some ways, the more honest form of love. I know this now. It took 5 years and a phone call and a guest room to find it, but I know it now. I want to add something about the 5 years between the wedding and the phone call, because that period is easy to compress into a summary, and it was not a summary to live through. Marcus and I had conversations over those 5 years about my parents and about Emily and about the dynamic I had grown up inside. These conversations were not easy. Marcus is direct in a way that is one of his best qualities and occasionally an uncomfortable one. He asked me in our second year of marriage whether I thought my parents knew what they had done. I said I thought they knew and had decided it was justified. He said, "And what do you think about that?" I said I was still figuring out what I thought about that. He said that seemed like a reasonable answer and left it there. By our 4th year, I had figured it out. What I thought was this: my parents loved me and had chosen repeatedly, when love and convenience were in tension, to choose convenience. Not because they were careless, but because I had always been the one who made it easy to choose convenience. I had trained them to do it by never making it cost them anything. And the wedding had been the one moment when the cost finally appeared, when they saw the bill for what their choice had always been, and they had flinched from it and chosen Emily's quarterly review anyway. I was not angry at them for the choice. I was done being the person who made the choice easy. 5 years also changed me in ways that were separate from the family dynamic. Marcus and I bought the house in year 3. It needed work. The previous owners had deferred maintenance in the way people defer maintenance when they are planning to sell, and the first summer we owned it was a summer of repairs. Marcus handled the structural things. I handled the aesthetic and organizational things. We both handled the decisions. It was the first extended project I had worked on with another person as a true equal, with neither of us carrying the weight of someone else's priorities. I say this because it is relevant to what happened with the phone call. By the time my mother called asking if we had space, I had been living for 5 years in a house that was mine in a way I had never had before, where the decisions were made with Marcus about us, for our family, without the background weight of someone else's needs calibrating the choices. Going back, taking my parents in, even temporarily, would have meant reinstalling that weight, not as a punishment. Just as a fact about what the situation would have been. Consulting firm had also grown in that time. I had moved from a solo practice to a 2-person operation when I brought in a part-time associate in year 4. The work had become more complex and more interesting. I had begun to develop a specialty in organizational communication during institutional change, the specific kind of clarity that is needed when organizations are going through transitions that affect people's work and lives. This specialty required me to be calm and clear-headed in circumstances that were stressful for others. I had become quite good at it. My mother called, I was calm, not cold calm. There's a difference I want to be clear about. I love my parents. I was glad to help them in the way I actually could help them, which was finding a good place for them to live and continuing to be their daughter. I was not able to help them in the way they were asking, which was to be present in the house, available, the absorptive presence I had always been. The assisted living community I found for them, the one with the gardening program and the chess group, is a good place. It is not a last resort. It is a community of people in their late 60s and 70s who have lives and activities and friends. My mother has grown things there that would not have grown in my guest room. My father has played chess more consistently in the past 2 years than in the previous decade. I visit once a month. We have lunch or sometimes dinner. The conversations are easier than they have ever been, easier, I think, because the weight of what I was absorbing has been set down, and what remains is just us, just the actual relationship without the management layer. My children call them Grandma and Grandpa and are delighted by the visits. My mother tells them stories about her garden. My father lets my daughter move his chess pieces incorrectly and then carefully explains why the move she made wouldn't work in an actual game. He is patient with her in a way I had forgotten he could be patient. We are all, I think, better versions of ourselves in this arrangement than we would have been in the other one. That matters. It does not erase what preceded it, but it matters. I want to say something about Emily, separately from everything else, because Emily is a person and not only a function in my story, and I think about her more than the story as I have told it might suggest. Emily is 41 now. She has a practice, a small one, solo, doing contract legal work for companies that need occasional counsel without a full-time attorney on staff. From what I hear through my cousin, the practice is stable. She is not wealthy, but she is managing. She has a cat. She lives in a city that suits her better than the one she built her early career in. She has, by the account I receive, become somewhat quieter than she used to be. Think about the version of Emily who exists now versus the version of Emily I grew up with. The version I grew up with was loud and urgent and treated every problem as a crisis, and every crisis as something that required the family to stop and respond. The version that exists now has apparently learned some things the hard way, the way people sometimes have to learn them. I'm not glad she learned them the hard way. I am simply noting that the curriculum was what it was. I hold no anger toward Emily. I want to be precise about this because I think anger would be the easier emotion and therefore the one worth resisting. What happened between us was not Emily's malice. It was a family system that organized itself around her needs and against mine, not because anyone intended harm, but because the organization followed the path of least resistance, and I had always made the least resistance the easiest path to take. Emily did not cause the wedding situation. She created the occasion for a choice that my parents made, and my parents made the choice that the system had always rewarded. If I had a conversation with Emily, we have not spoken in 6 years, and I do not expect to in the near term, I think I would tell her something like this. I don't hold what happened against you specifically. I hold it against the pattern which you were as much a product of as I was. You learned that your needs would be treated as urgent and mine would be treated as manageable. I learned to make my needs manageable because no one was going to treat them as urgent. Neither of us chose this. We were just children in a family with a specific structure. What I would not do is pretend that the structure is fine. The structure was not fine. It took a wedding and 5 years and a phone call and a list of 3 assisted living communities to begin to change it. That is a lot of cost for a change that should not have required so much. Marcus has been good about all of this in the way that Marcus is good about most things, present, honest, not over-involved. He has opinions about my family, but he holds them carefully, sharing them when I ask and not offering them unsolicited. When I told him about the call from my mother and what I had decided, he said, "Is that what you want?" I said it was. He said, "Then it's the right call." This is the kind of support that is actually useful. Confirmation that the decision is mine and that he will stand with it. We have been married 8 years. We have 2 children, 7 and 5, who are good-natured in the specific way of children who are securely loved and appropriately challenged. They visit my parents monthly. My parents in the assisted living community have become the grandparents I had hoped for them to be rather than the grandparents who were always slightly overextended and slightly anxious. There is a version of family that works. We found it eventually. It required some difficult decisions to get there. I run the consulting practice from an office in our house. 2 days a week I work from the co-working space downtown, which I maintain partly for the change of environment and partly for the conversations with other small business owners that happen informally in shared spaces. One of those conversations last fall turned into a referral that became my largest client. This is the texture of how a small business grows, slowly, through relationships, through showing up consistently and doing good work. I have been building this practice for 8 years. It is mine in a way that employment was not. The clients are mine, the reputation is mine, the decisions about how to work are mine. I think about this sometimes in relation to the wedding. The wedding was also mine, and my parents treated it as an occasion that could be rescheduled or deprioritized because I, the steady one, would understand. I did not understand, but I also did not yet know that I had the right to not understand. I know it now. The wedding photographs are in an album on the 3rd shelf of the bookshelf in our living room. I look at them every year on our anniversary. The light was good that day. The barn was beautiful. My aunt looked wonderful. My parents are not in any of the photographs, but my parents are in my children's lives. They are in the Sunday visits and the book my mother is reading aloud to my daughter, chapter by chapter. They are in the garden my father shows my son how to plant each spring. We are all making the most of what we actually have, in the arrangement that we actually found our way to. It is not the arrangement I imagined at 26. It is the one that works.